Everyone from Andor is going to die in Season 2. At least I think so. Andor Season 1 has certainly given plenty of clues as to what the plot direction will be in Season 2 of Andor, with the stakes being higher than ever. But what remains a bit of a mystery are the fates of the character we were introduced to moving past Season 2. We were given plenty of endearing characters to attach ourselves to, such as B2, Brasso, and many others. But because of Andor's positioning on the Star Wars timeline right between the prequels and Rogue One, there has yet to be any indication as to what these characters will be doing next during A New Hope and onwards. Now, the lack of lore regarding these characters moving into A New Hope and so on can be chalked down to the fact that the lore has yet to be established. But I think that the complete silence of these characters after Andor Season 2 might hint towards the end of their respective stories. That by the end of Season 2, we will see each and every one of our favorite characters die off one by one. The biggest hint and clue for this is probably seen in Rogue One. As we're introduced to Cassian on the Rings of Kafrene and throughout the rest of the film, it becomes pretty evident that Cassian is being depicted as a bit of a loner. With the exception of K2SO, he really works and operates alone. And this seems to draw some distinction between what we see in Season 1 of Andor. Comparing the two introductions of the same character in two different time periods, Season 1 seems to set out to give us plenty of detail regarding Andor's personal life. We learn that he is good friends with Brasso, that he has an enduring friendship and relationship with B, and that he might have in the past had a very close relationship with Bix. Rogue One, on the other hand, doesn't really do much of that at all. In fact, besides Cassian reporting to Rebel High Command, he doesn't seem to have a lot of friends even among the other rebels. And while we do see most of Cassian's friends escape Ferrix in the finale, it does beg the question of where is everyone in Rogue One? In Rogue One, when Jyn is introduced to Cassian, Mon Mothma introduces him as an operative working for the Rebel Intelligence.
This is Captain Cassian Andor, Rebel Intelligence.
And as the film continues, it becomes rather apparent that Cassian reports to David Stravens, the former member of Republic Intelligence, now a Rebel general. But if you take Season 1 of Andor into consideration, the person who should really be in charge of this role is actually Luthen. Considering how much influence he's had on the early beginnings of the Rebel Alliance and his close relationship with Mon Mothma, it would only seem right that Luthen be placed in charge of Rebel Intelligence. But as we see in Rogue One, Luthen is nowhere to be found and nowhere to be seen. Now, one could assume that Luthen is off doing something else or simply decided to retire from fighting against the Empire, but that doesn't really seem like something Luthen would do, at least not from what we were shown in Season 1. Given how deep Luthen's hatred of the Empire runs and how instrumental he was in the early beginnings of the rebellion, it doesn't seem right that he would choose to simply walk away or relegate himself to a lesser role within the Alliance. If at all, Luthen should be right front and center when it comes to rebel espionage, and at the very least should have been seen at the table when the rebels were discussing whether to attack Scarif. Which leads me to conclude that if Luthen wasn't present for the events of Rogue One, then he might very well be dead. The same goes for characters such as Vel and Cinta, two of the best operatives Luthen had in his arsenal. Where were they during the rebel attack on Scarif? Recall that as we enter the third act of Rogue One, there is a great moment where Cassian decides to round up a group of rebels and decides to lead them to help Jyn in her mission to recover the Death Star plans.
We've all done terrible things on behalf of the rebellion. Spies, saboteurs, assassins. Everything I did for the rebellion.
And the scene clearly lays out that many of these guys were just like Cassian, rebel operatives who had compromised their own morals for the sake of a greater cause. Which really, if you think about it, should have also included Vel and Cinta. Both of them would have definitely fallen into the same category, and both of them were more than willing to give their everything for the cause. Now, we could also say that they might have been off on another mission at the time, and therefore couldn't be there for Scarif, but I choose to think that this might just indicate that they too are dead by the time Rogue One rolls around. It's also worth mentioning that while Rogue One and Andor do have similar opening scenes,
What happened?
We'll be alright.
they aren't exactly the same. The one that we see in Andor was very much an act of self-preservation. The one that we see in Rogue One, while could also be argued to be an act of self-preservation, was definitely done as an act to keep the rebellion safe from the Empire, ensuring that the rebel informant couldn't be tortured for more information. These two scenes, when put side to side, do really emphasize Cassian's character growth from then and now. But I think that the scene in Rogue One actually adds an additional new dimension to Cassian's character that we have yet to see happen in the Cassian that we know in Andor. You see, it's one thing to execute the enemy in an act of self-preservation, but it's a whole other level to shoot an ally for the sake of the cause. If at all, it actually demonstrates a certain coldness within Cassian, a far cry from the younger Cassian who was willing to risk his life to save the people he cared about, to risk walking the extra mile. It's hard to imagine the Cassian that we see in Rogue One doing the exact same thing, risking his life to save Bix, unless it needed to be done to serve the rebel cause. Another comparison that can be given is when Nemik was mortally wounded during the escape from Aldhani. In this moment, Cassian is put forward with a choice, either to risk heading to a nearby moon to see if Nemik can be saved, or to let Nemik die and continue on with the mission, something which Vel was advocating for. Now, as we know, Cassian ultimately chose to save Nemik, but I seriously doubt that the Cassian that we know in Rogue One would have made the same choice. If at all, had the Cassian of Rogue One been placed in the same position, he probably would have decided to let Nemik die for the sake of the rebellion, which really just brings up the question of how exactly did Cassian's character end up like this in Rogue One? How did Cassian's character, who was more than willing to stick his neck out to save the people he cared about, end up being this cold-hearted killer that was ready to drop anyone if it meant serving the rebel cause? In Rogue One, Cassian is portrayed as someone who has clearly had a lot of resentment and bitterness within him.
Some of us live it. I've been in this fight since I was 6 years old. You're not the only one who lost everything.
Harboring a hatred against the Empire that seems to run far deeper than what we are shown in Season 1. And so when we consider what pushes him down a darker path, then the answer does seem to point to the idea that all of his friends must have been killed by the Empire, that the characters that we have come to know and love in Season 1 of Andor aren't fated to make it out of Season 2, causing Cassian to take on characteristics that is not unlike Luthen's own in Season 1. Not to mention, I wouldn't be surprised if the showrunners decided to take on a similar route and ended the show the same way they ended the movie, with each of these supporting characters being picked off one by one, making small sacrifices in hopes that the Death Star plans can finally reach the right hands. And I have a feeling that this is what might play out in Season 2 of Andor, with each of the characters that we have been introduced to making individual sacrifices in hopes of organizing and kicking off a rebellion. A rebellion that we will later get to see in Rogue One. I think it would go a long way in demonstrating the constant sacrifice many rebels had to make in order for them to reach and get to where they are now, adding much more gravity to the entire movement. And even if not all of them are dead, my best guess is that most of them probably will. We of course already know that Melshi is one such exception, so there might still be a few others. Season 1 of Andor has already demonstrated a willingness to kill off existing characters to service the plot and Cassian's character growth, so don't be surprised if it continues to do so moving forward. Anyways, that's all for this video. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I am the Lost Acolyte,
and I have spoken.